Hello, my name is Olga. I am a communication designer and master's student of New Media Art Department at Polish-Japanese Academy of Information Technology. In communication design, every small detail matters, and even a single punctuation mark could convey multiple meanings, communicate emotions, or change its functions depending on the context or media. Today, I will talk about punctuation in text and visual communication in the digital age. More specifically, about how punctuation marks and signs are combined in some novel ways, thereby providing a completely different semantic meaning. They are also frequently used even without a textual context as independent elements. Even when used within a text, their original role changes to such an extent that they can modify the overall meaning of a sentence. I divided my presentation into 3 parts. The first part is dedicated to conventional punctuation, the most well-known marks and symbols which we use in our writing. The second part is about emoticons, pictorial representation of facial expressions. The third part of current presentation is about unconventional punctuation, novel or not widely used marks. Punctuation, in its conventional meaning, helps us to organize and structure our writing for better communication by using spaces, punctuation marks, and typographical symbols. It is worth noting that the well-known and widely used space, literally invisible sign, did not exist in many of the ancient scripts. For example, in the ancient Greece, in the Boustrophedon, by bidirectional writing, there were no breaks in between words, and every new line of the text was written in an opposite direction, as a path of an ox across the field. The modern punctuation was elaborated in the 19th century. Nowadays, the use of punctuation marks varies depending on the media and the target audience for which a certain text is written. For example, scientific writing used a formal technical language with relatively strict punctuation rules. Here, a casual, unstructured arrangement of signs is unacceptable, especially when it concerns strict mathematical formulas or a scientific statement. On the other hand, in poetic pieces of literature, the author's arrangement of punctuation marks often does not follow the established rules, but is still acceptable. Punctuation in this case is used by the author to convey the emotional message of the piece, improve the interaction between the reader and the piece, and establish a connection between the reader and the author. Some punctuation marks might be more expressive than others. For example, in Adrian Frutiger's classification, punctuation marks were divided into 3 main groups depending on their main purpose: sentence structuring sign, expression signs, and reference signs. Expression signs include the exclamation mark, expressing affirmation or exclamation, the question mark, expressing a question or a doubt, and the quotation marks, expressing different types of quoted speech. It is impossible to ignore the fact that communication through written messages is deprived of physical, personal communication, when we can see a person, their emotions and feelings, as well as other nonverbal signals. In informal writing, we often replace all these by words, punctuation, emoticons, emojis, pictures, or voice messages. Concerning punctuation, for example, 2 opponents in a dialogue can use an excessive number of characters, such as several exclamation and question marks, as well as many full stops. Some punctuation marks change their meaning in texting nowadays. For example, a full stop at the end of the phrase might be perceived not just at the end of it, but makes the message be less sincere, according to the study of Celia Klein, or convey negative emotions. A full stop at the end of the message in texting is known as a dot of hate. The dot has acquired yet another role in the design works of Un Mundo Feliz, a public initiative that unites cultural activists and graphic designers who aim to disseminate social and political messages through their artworks in the digital media. In this example, all the dots in the font Arial were changed to swastika symbol. In general, punctuation is frequently used to design book covers, especially for books about typography, as for example a strong graphic by Herbert Lubalin on the left, and book cover by Alan Fletcher in the middle, and another book cover for Shady Characters, very interesting book about the history of punctuation marks. One more beautiful example, book of poems, we first published in 1905, illustrated with punctuation marks and silk printed on craft paper. According to the description of the book, punctuation signs are markers of pauses, interruptions, asides and stops, but they also point to intonation, intent and emotion. Speaking of less frequently used symbols and signs, it's worth mentioning that some symbols, albeit not used today in everyday writing, are still widely used by the graphic designers to prepare books, corporate identity, posters, and other graphic materials. Due to their unusual shape and semiotic meaning of the past, they have become quite popular nowadays. A good example of this, an index translated from Latin as little hand. The symbol represents a pointing hand, which literally means pay attention to or look at the direction of the pointing finger. The modern function of this sign in many graphic design projects is to catch the attention of the reader, user, consumer, or any other person staring at the sign when, for example, passing by a cafe, thereby inviting them to enter inside. In the broad sense, the meaning of this punctuation sign nowadays is the same as in the 20th century. Punctuation in logotypes typically conveys some semantic information, such as, for example, in the personal logotype of the type designer Martin Meyer, who creates font families consisting of both serif and sans-serif typefaces. Accordingly, his logo represents a handshake of a serif and a sans-serif manicures. Another example, the book cover for the Scarlet Letter novel from 1850. The pointing hands perfectly reflect the main topic of the novel, social shaming and stigmatizing. In text communication, especially texting, that is partially limited by the set of characters on the keyboard, people invented a new way of conveying emotions by using combinations of punctuation marks as well as numbers and letters, that is, by using emoticons. The first digital emoticon, at least in the way we use it today, was used by Scott Fellman in 1982, when he included a smiling face and a sad face in his email. Emoticons, particularly faces, communicate emotions in a very literal way. I checked as many emoticons as I could find on the internet and in my private messages, and it appears that the widest category is a smiling happy face, which was a pleasant discovery for me. The smiley face is a very recognizable symbol, and it is widely used everywhere in visual communication, labels, magazines, street signs. Here are the few examples of smiley face. The system of such signs has become widely adopted in digital communication. We could not just show emotions, but control their intensity. The rule is quite easy. More braces, more excited or happy you are. I was trying to find emoticons not just in texting, but in more formal emails. Here are the examples of emails from my professors. In most of the private emails with emoticons, I could find only smiley, and the most frequent meaning of these emails is cheering me up, demonstrate friendly feelings, or the satisfying level of my work. The system of emoticons is constantly supplemented with new signs as well as with so-called text art. My favorite part of emoticon collection: typographical portraits, very minimalistic depiction of well-known artists, musicians, celebrities, movie or game characters. My favorite one is probably a cyclops, which you can see on the right top corner. Less symbols is probably used in the smiley, which I call lazy smile, only one brace even without dots. Interestingly, the first emoticons appeared long before mankind was able to send electronic messages. The first use of the emoticon is related to the article Typographical Art, which was published in 1881 and illustrated with 4 pictograms, symbolizing melancholy, indifference, surprise, and joy. Text art also existed before the era of personal computers. For example, in 1948 article Keyboard Art, Paul Hadley provided a creative masterclass on creating own emoticons using a usual typewriter. In the logotypes of this Type Foundry's company and the Laughter Conference identity, it's easy to spot a smiling face, resembling the famous emoticon smiley. With the emergence of emojis, they become very popular not only as a supplement to the text, but become a text itself. One of the examples, Book from the Ground, which is written in emoticons, where you can still see actually the punctuation marks which serve their conventional role. As well as in this beautiful example, the book Genesis, where the biblical creation story was translated into pictograms, symbols, and logos. The emergence of texting is just a single example of how human languages are constantly evolving, and in this part of presentation I will briefly review the history of unconventional punctuation marks, demonstrate the examples of such marks, and present my personal project. The starting point that commented the creation of my project, new set of punctuation marks, was a bookshop receipt with some words of gratitude, accompanied by the following unusual emoticon. Obviously, such an emoticon makes the message more sincere, personal, and joyful. And I started to search for examples of unusual emotional punctuation marks and symbols, and found a huge variety of them. During many centuries, people tried to express their feelings and emotions through different marks, constantly experimenting with new shapes and curves. The first documented attempt to express thoughts without explicitly using words, but rather using a specific sign in text communication, dates back to the 16th century and was made by the London printers. The symbol was used by them to mark a rhetorical question and looks like a reversed question mark. The first documented evidence of using an irony mark dates to 1668 and was proposed by John Wilkins. The sign looks like an inverted exclamation mark. It was not used very widely, but the idea of a punctuation mark to represent irony has been quite popular until very recently, judging from the number of various design signs. A few of them are depicted on this part of the timeline. And more recent sarc mark from 2006 and irony mark by underwear from 2007. However, none of these marks is being actively used nowadays. In 2017, a novel punctuation system was proposed by the Austrian graphic designer and typographer Walter Bochacz. In his book Typologies, he described philosophical and linguistic ideas that provided a foundation for creating a completely new system of signs. The system includes 30 symbols that serve to represent different emotions and human moods, such as, for example, sympathy, solidarity, curiosity, skepticism, boredom, and so on. All these are typically difficult to express in text communication, as in the words of author, they are conveyed instantly when speaking face to face. The most widely known mark overviewed in this part of the presentation is probably the interrobang. Designed by Martin Spector in 1962, it represents a combination of the question and exclamation marks merged in a single glyph. Here are a few examples of proposed by him and the journal readers interrobang's designs. By the way, this sign is used nowadays as a logotype of a few companies. There are also other new punctuation marks available online that aim to address narrow tailored purposes in text communication, such as sarc mark or the set of legal marks. Coming back to the project Typologies, it's worth mentioning that it served as a fruitful source of inspiration for the development of my project, in which I asked my friends to contribute to the design of the emotional punctuation signs, which could be used in texting. The participants of my project Between the Words come from different professional backgrounds, linguists, software developers, and designers, who were asked to create their own punctuation mark to express an emotion, mood, or state. This difference in backgrounds is assumed to have no impact on the quality and uniqueness of the created signs. Accordingly, each participant provided a description and example of their sign. These are the drawings of the signs which I got back from my friends. Some of them are more abstract, some of them are more pictorial. Essentially, this project is a creative exercise on possible ways of expressing human emotions in written communication by means of graphic signs. Despite its seemingly informal and casual nature, the project reflects the existing tendencies in modern digital communication. All the resulting images were post-processed by me to create a single system compatible with the font Ica Regular by Maciej Polczynski. After some sketching, I got the final set of punctuation marks, which consists of 12 symbols: serenity, hangover, terrible excitement, silence, and others. In the examples provided by marks creators, the meanings of the marks was repeated twice in a text and in a mark itself. So we removed repeated parts from the text, and some of the final examples are presented on this slide. This project is rather an experiment, but not a direct statement. In my opinion, each newly invented sign needs time for evolution, strong need in society, and implementation in the digital technologies. It should be recognizable by a group of people. It should exist in different typefaces and be accessible. In texting, we often value minimum time delays, so probably we will not search for hidden characters, Rather, we will type the most accessible symbols on our keyboard. Of course, it's opposite when it comes to experiments, artistic books, or artistic projects. I enjoyed the result as well as my friends who are the real creators of this science. The project Between the Words, which I briefly presented today, was published only as a private publication in a very small amount of copies. But another work of mine, as well as work of other students, graphic designers and typographers, are published on the webpage of Future Text Project, an academic research platform focused on text-based communication across cultural, international and interdisciplinary fields. And I invite you to access free publications in the repository of the Future Text Project. Thank you for your attention. I hope you will find this information useful for you.